Good morning, everyone. This is Tonal Discourse, your destination for all things music theory. My name is Seth Brown. I'm a composer and a jazz trombonist.
I'm Graham Thomason, a composer and jazz pianist.
And we're here today to talk to you about our second topic of conversation. This is augmented sixth chords. So what is an augmented sixth chord? How do you write it? What are the different types? We're going to get into all those questions today, and we're going to explain it in a way that is super simple. Before we get into this, we're actually going to go into a quick precursor topic. So you may have heard of cadential 6/4 chords. For those of you that already know what cadential 6/4 chords are and don't need to debrief on this, we post timestamps in the description of the video, so you can just go ahead and skip to the next section. Can you explain to our listeners what a cadential 6/4 chord is?
Sure. So a cadential 6/4 chord in any key is the tonic chord with the fifth scale degree in the bass. So in the key of D minor, for example, we have a D minor triad with A in the bass. And the function of this is to go to a 5/7 chord or 5 chord, which sounds like a 5 chord sounds like this, or a 5/7 chord, and inevitably returns to the tonic chord, this time usually in root position.
Right, so can you explain why we call it 6/4 as opposed to anything else, the actual reason for the numbers?
Sure. So 6/4 refers to the intervals between the note in the bass and the other members of the triad. So the note in the bass in the key of D minor is A, and the D is a fourth above, and the F, which is the third of this minor triad, is a minor sixth above. So going from top to bottom, those notes of the triad are the 6 and 4.
Right. So a cadential 6/4 chord is just a 1/6/4 in the key that wants to resolve to a 5 chord or a 5/7 chord. This prolongs the period of dominant function. Is really how it functions. Now that we've reviewed this topic, we're going to go ahead and dive into augmented sixth chords. Graham, can you start us off with our first augmented sixth chord, and what is it called?
Sure. Our first augmented sixth chord is a German augmented sixth chord. And what we basically do to form that is we form our cadential 6/4 chord. Let's say we're still in D minor. And what we basically do is take the upper note down by a half step and the note in the bass up by a half step. So basically, we're thinking of this cadential 6/4 chord. We're taking the fifth of that chord down by a half step from A to G sharp, and the note in the bass, which is in A as well, because we always double the note in the bass in a cadential 6/4 chord, or in most 6/4 chords. We're taking the note in the bass A up to a B flat. And then that interval resolves outward again. So we hear this, and then we usually hear, and that's just German augmented sixth of 5, then cadential 6/4, 5/7/1.
So what is the actual shape of the German augmented sixth chord? We notice if we play it on the piano, it's startlingly similar to another very common chord. Can you explain that similarity?
Sure. So this looks a lot like a dominant 7 chord or a flat 7 chord. So when we play this, the notes again are B flat, D, F, and the note which is a half step below A. In this case, it's G sharp. But in the context, it looks a lot like it could be in A flat. And, well, if it's B flat, D, F, and A flat, it seems like it could be a 5/7 in the key of E flat, right? A B flat 7, that's the 5 in E flat. However, here it's not functioning that way, because instead of this A flat resolving down by half step, it's actually a G sharp, which is its enharmonic equivalent, and it resolves up by half step. And the B flat resolves down by half step.
So I believe Graham just actually provided some very important insight as to why these are called augmented sixth chords. Graham, can you point out the distance between the bass note and the top note in your voicing? So the distance between that B flat to that G sharp, with the G sharp being spelled a G sharp because it's going up instead of down.
Sure. Well, the first thing to know is if we're starting on B flat and we're walking up in the key, let's say of D minor, for example, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're on G natural. Now this is a major sixth. If it were G flat, it would be a minor sixth. G natural is a major sixth. Well, if we take it up another half step, that's an augmented sixth. And again, it looks a lot like A flat when we put it in this context. But that's because the enharmonic equivalent of A flat, which is a fancy way to say it's the same note with a different spelling, is G sharp. And the reason we spell it with a G sharp is because sharps ascend and flats descend.
Alright, so let's go ahead and review that concept. We have the augmented sixth chord, which is a chord that contains an augmented sixth. It is predominant, meaning that it is a secondary dominant chord. It has a secondary dominant function. Again, if you don't know what a secondary dominant is, check out our last video on secondary dominant chords and their function. So we know this functions in a predominant way. We know that it contains an augmented sixth because of the way that you spell the flat 7 or augmented sixth in harmonic flat 7. And we know that the bottom and top notes resolve outward to a cadential 6/4 chord in the key that can then go to a 5 chord and then back to 1. So there are actually two other augmented sixth chords. Graham, can you explain what these two are and how they're different from our German augmented sixth chord?
Sure. Our first new one is a French augmented sixth chord. And the thing about this German augmented sixth chord, as we said, is that it resolves to a cadential 6/4 in our key. However, there's a way to get straight to a chord in our key without going through a cadential 6/4. And that way is by using the Italian or French augmented sixth chords. And so let's start with our French augmented sixth chord. Let's say we're still in the key of D minor. Instead of having to go well, what's the problem with using a German augmented sixth chord to go straight to the 5/7 chord in the key of D minor? Well, we have the problem of a parallel fifth. Right? And that might sound fine, but there's a lot of things that sound fine in music theory classes that are technically a big no-no, and this is one of those things. We can't go straight to a 5/7 or a 5 chord using a German augmented sixth chord because it creates this parallel fifth with the B flat and F in the chord going directly down by the same interval. And so we can't do that. So instead, we have a way to get around this and go straight to a 5 or 5/7 chord. And this is the French augmented sixth chord. Now, what am I doing differently between this and this? All I did was lower the fifth of this chord by a half step. It went from F to E. Let's listen to the difference again. Here's a German augmented sixth chord and a French augmented sixth chord. And this is great because it allows us to use this common tone of E, which is present both in the augmented sixth chord and in the A or A7 chord, which is the 5 in our key. Now, an Italian augmented sixth chord is similar to the French in that it usually allows us to go straight to the 5, but it just leaves out that note that I changed. So, whereas a French augmented sixth chord in the key of D minor is spelled B flat, D, E, and G sharp, an Italian augmented sixth chord in the key of D minor is just spelled B flat, D, and G sharp, so it leaves out that E. But we can do the same thing. Or
Right, so what we just went over was German augmented sixth chords, French augmented sixth chords, and Italian augmented sixth chords. We talked about how they're different and how they're the same. They function generally the same. But two of these augmented sixth chords allow you to skip the cadential 6/4 and instead just going straight to the 5 chord, the dominant 5 chord, and then back to 1. So it saves you a couple of steps there. So the main reason that we call something an augmented 6th chord is because it contains an augmented 6th interval. Can you go ahead and play that? It's inharmonically a minor 7, which is why when you look at a German augmented 6th chord, it looks just like a dominant 7 chord. Go ahead and play it. So an easy way to think of these is you can think of it as a dominant chord built a half step above your 5 chord.
5 chord, and the dominant 7 chord built a half step above.
Right, so the only difference is that you're spelling that flat 7 as a sharp 6. You're spelling it as an augmented 6th. So if you found this information interesting and you want to learn more, you can check out our Patreon link below and you'll get access to our worksheets that correspond with our podcast every episode. Remember to click that subscribe button, like us, and make sure you get notified about every video that comes out every Tuesday. This is Seth and Graham signing off.